What's up, everybody? Welcome to OU Insider Live, a Wednesday evening tradition. No Brandon Drum this evening. I am Parker Thune. That is Jesse Crittenden in Brandon's stead. And we're here with you guys for the next hour to talk OU football, recruiting, Jeff Lebby, any and all topics that you all want to hit pertinent to Oklahoma athletics. It's basketball season now. Shoot, we can talk about that if y'all want to, but we keep this very, very chat oriented. I like to think of this as a Franklin Delano Roosevelt fireside chat, only transposed to the OU sports world. We are brought to you, of course, by Olipop, the soda that's good for you, folks. I'm drinking their seasonal flavor, crisp apple, this evening. They have 16 flavors, all delicious. Whatever your soda of choice, Olipop's got a flavor for you. Never more than 5 grams of sugar in one of these cans. Absolutely nothing artificial, only natural flavors and sweeteners. And it always comes with 9 grams of fiber and prebiotics to enhance digestive health. If you haven't checked Olipop out yet, drinkolipop.com is where you're going to want to head. Did you hear the can opening that time, Jesse, or
I heard it a little, but
okay, I'll take it. A little is better than not at all. But drinkolipop.com, promo code CHAMPU20 to get 20% off your very first Olipop order. We appreciate Olipop and their partnership with OU Insider. And with that, kind of going to lay out some ground rules for those of you that are new. Many of you are not. Obviously, a lot of you tune in on a regular basis. But if this is your first time with us on OU Insider Live, first off, greatly appreciate you. Secondly, we do have a live chat feature. You can ask questions, share insights in that live chat feature. There are so many of you on a weekly basis, though, that we cannot guarantee that we will get to your question or the topic of conversation that you would like us to hit. However, the way you can guarantee that is by dropping a super chat. So a super chat comes with a financial contribution. You choose the amount, but we do make it a point to address any and all super chats that we get throughout the show. So if you just have one topic of conversation that we don't end up getting around to and you got to have us weigh in on it, drop a super chat. That's the easiest way to make sure that we read your question or your comment. With that, let's jump in, Jesse. And I think the most obvious place to start before we get around to recruiting, and it is going to be a big weekend as far as OU recruiting is concerned, the natural place to start is what everybody's talking about this week, Jesse, which is Jeff Lebby, the Oklahoma offensive coordinator, who has kind of become the scapegoat for all of Oklahoma's misfortunes and shortcomings over the last couple of weeks.
You're right. And honestly, Parker, I read your column that you put at ouinsider.com a little bit earlier, and I honestly thought you hit it on the head. Here's the reality. I think a lot of the criticisms are warranted. There's been times in the last 2 games where the defense has done enough, especially against Oklahoma State. The defense did enough to win the game, and the offense either couldn't extend the lead or couldn't seal the victory and make enough plays when it was needed. I think the dichotomy is that this offense has put up yards. It's put up yards. There's been times, particularly against Oklahoma State, where they moved the ball really well. The running game that's had some inconsistencies all year for a lot of the Oklahoma State game looked really good. Averaged 5.5 yards per carry. There were really good moments, I think, but kind of like you alluded to, there's times where it almost doesn't matter what happens if you can't seal the win, if you can't do enough in the final few minutes to get a W. The other side of it, though, is that it's not all on Jeff Lebby. The turnovers have been bad. This team turned the ball over 5 times in the first 7 weeks. They turned it over the 6 times the last 2 games. And none of that, and most of that, if any of it at all, is not on Jeff Lebby and this coaching staff. It's on the players. And the other side of it is this team has been wildly undisciplined. I know there's a lot about Big 12 officiating and conspiracy theories and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that's warranted or not warranted, but there's been times where this team hasn't been disciplined on either side of the ball. So I think all of that is, I think what I would tell fans is, I'm not saying criticism isn't warranted, but it's not just on one person or one thing. There's a litany of things that have gone wrong the last 2 weeks, and I don't know exactly what the solution is other than for this team to get on the same page, to be a little less disjointed, and to be a little bit better situationally.
It's, and I was hesitant to make this comparison in the column, Jesse, but there are some Oklahoma fans that are starting to sound real similar to a lot of the Nebraska fans I grew up around. Because obviously I grew up in the Omaha area in the late 2000s, early 2010s. At that point, you're 10, 15 years removed from the glory days for Nebraska football. But all of those Husker fans still were under the impression that their program should be competing for national titles, and anything short of it was a failure. And so that was constantly the standard that they referenced, was the standard that Tom Osborne established in the 90s. Why can't we continually perform like that year in and year out? It must not be the right coach. It must not be the right play caller. Something's wrong with the leadership. We got to have a change if that's not the level that we're competing on. And what you've seen with Nebraska the last decade or so is, as they've shuffled the deck with coach after coach, coordinator after coordinator, they've just sunk lower and lower and lower as a program, because there is no continuity. There is no stability, at least no good stability. And as we sit here today, they haven't played in a bowl game since 2016, Jesse, the Obama administration. That's how long it's been. So making change for the sake of making change is never a prudent strategy. And I did think it very telling that Brent Venables at his press conference on Tuesday seemed almost annoyed at the insinuation that Jeff Lebby was leaving things on the table. And he, to be fair, at his coach's show on Monday, Venables did acknowledge, as he should have, right, that 4th and 5 play call was not the play that they should have called. Like that, if you're not acknowledging that, well, you're just not living on planet reality. But he gets up there on Tuesday, and Venables cited all of the statistics at which Oklahoma ranks at the pinnacle of the conference, top 5, top 10 nationally. And the ones that I cited in the column, Jesse, right now, Oklahoma's averaging 40 points a game. 40 points a game. And is that somewhat inflated by 73 against Arkansas State and 66 against Tulsa? Sure. But 40 points a game is 40 points a game. They're 7th in the nation in total offense. 7th in the nation. And so, again, we haven't really seen this program stymied offensively. SMU did a pretty good job of keeping them in check for 3 quarters. But even so, Oklahoma was able to open things up in the 4th and run away from the Mustangs. So until I see Oklahoma's offense flummoxed, I'm not really worried about Jeff Lebby as your play caller, because I also believe, Jesse, as I stated on the postgame podcast after Bedlam, that situational issues are a lot easier to fix than systemic issues. And Oklahoma doesn't have systemic issues right now offensively.
Parker, I agree with everything you just said. Let me add a couple of things. I do think, understandably, that the amount of offensive success that this team had from 2015 to 2019, and really 2020 in some ways, I think that set almost an impossible standard for how all offenses should be moving forward. I think it got easy to be in the mindset that OU is going to score on every possession. Everything's going to look perfect, because, as tough as the last administration leaving all of that was, the offense was playing at insane levels, and they were led by incredibly good quarterbacks who were at the top of college football history ever, bar none. I do think that's not the norm. What OU enjoyed for several seasons there for a little while is not the norm. That's the number one thing. And two, I agree with you, Parker. I think it's always easy to think about coaching changes, but you always have to think about, okay, if you make the change, who are you getting off the street? Who in the college football landscape are you bringing in that not only makes sense, that there's an obvious roadmap to that replacement being better, but also fits within how Brent Venables runs the program? So it's not to say don't criticize, That's not to say there aren't things to criticize, but I think it's easy to be mad or or think about things like that without thinking about, well, once you actually make the change, what if the change isn't any better? What if it's worse? So I think I would encourage people, have criticisms if you have them. The last 2 weeks have been bad. This team a month ago was on top of the college football world with a great win over Texas. That's not the case anymore. OU is not in the driver's seat for the Big 12 title, but have a holistic view of not only this season, but the seasons moving forward. That's what I would encourage people to have. Parker, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I posted the screenshot today on Twitter of a text that I got from a connection down in the Southeast who's associated with a program that has won a national title in the 21st century, i.e. more recently than Oklahoma. And the text read, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the message within was, I'm going to need you to explain to me why on earth OU is 7-2 in year 2 of a complete rebuild with a win in the biggest game of the season over Texas, and people want Jeff Lebby's head. And instantly, people in my mentions were going, well, he doesn't know anything about our circumstances, which is true to an extent. But I would also say, doesn't that perspective, isn't that a refreshing perspective to have? Because that tells you what the pulse of the rest of the nation is. If you get outside the Oklahoma bubble, people look at what Oklahoma has done this season, and it's impressive. They're pleasantly surprised by it. They saw 6-7 last year. They were mindful of 6-7 last year. They saw Oklahoma go and beat Texas. They see Oklahoma's resurgent campaign. And I'm fairly certain that they see those 2 losses to Oklahoma State and Kansas in a much more favorable light than OU fans do. Because OU fans think, oh, well, we lost to Oklahoma State and Kansas. They think of Kansas as historically the worst program in the modern Big 12, which, to be fair, they have been. But that's the Kansas of today is not the Kansas of 5 years ago. And for Oklahoma State, as an OU fan, you think of Oklahoma State as little brother. But if you get outside the OU bubble, you look at what Oklahoma State has done in 2023, and it's maybe the most impressive turnaround in college football. So there's not a whole lot of shame from that outsider's perspective in losing to those 2 schools. And so that's another encouragement I give to everybody when we're engaging in these conversations is allow yourself to approach this from an outsider's perspective. Consider what somebody without a vested interest in OU football would think about the situation at OU, whatever that may be, whether it's coaching, whether it has to do with the quarterback play. It was Dylan Gabriel last year that was the hot button topic of conversation, and this year it's Jeff Lebby. Just consider what an outsider from a different fan base, from a different part of the country, who isn't day in, day out consumed with OU football, what they think of your program.
I'd agree with you. I think here's the thing. I think Oklahoma is one of the most successful, dominant programs, not only of the last 20 years, but historically ever. I think that's going to warp any fan's perspective. And given that OU made the college football playoff in 2015, 2017, 2018, 2019, and if not for a rough start to 2020, they probably could have made it in 2022 or 2020, and they could have made it in 2021 without a couple of losses. All that being said, I think it's fair for an OU fan to feel like the standards haven't been met. That is the reality. But I also think OU is so historically dominant that it's easy to not think about how an outsider would look at things, like you just said. Here's the thing. Here's what it all comes down to. I predicted before the season started that OU would finish 10-2. That is what in the regular season I said 10-2. That is on record. That is in an article I published at OU Insider. They can still do that. And look, 10-2 after going 6-7 last year, consider how big of a change the last administration leaving was. How many players left the portal? Caleb Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner, left through the portal. Think about how big of a change that was. To go from 6-7 to 10-2 would be still an incredible jump, even if it hasn't looked the way that maybe a lot of us would think of it. If OU can win out these last 3 games, go to a decent bowl game, maybe even finish 11-2, things will feel good going into the SEC. But Parker, West Virginia is a good team, but just like the last 2 weeks, Oklahoma State's a good team, Kansas is a good team. Those were games Oklahoma could have won. Win this weekend, things feel better. Lose this weekend, things feel even worse than they do right now. So I think it, again, puts a lot of pressure. And if they lose again on Saturday, the way they have kind of the last 2 weeks where the offense has chances to put the game away and they can't put it away, that feels a lot worse. So again, it puts pressure on this weekend. A night game against West Virginia, find a way to win it. 8-2 feels not that bad. Fall to 7-3 after being 6-0 with a win over Texas, that feels pretty bad. So it puts a lot of pressure on this weekend. You're muted again. Parker, you're muted again.
Unbelievable. Thank you for keeping me on track, Jesse. I was saying, I was getting prepared to share with you a word from our sponsor, Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. So you can straddle the line between 2 different sports. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. This weekend, I like Joe Mixon, a very appetizing matchup against a porous Houston Texans defense. My projection is that he ends up with more than his projected rushing yards total against the Texans. So a former Sooner that I expect to excel this weekend on Sunday. Now, you can go to prizepicks.com/insider and use code INSIDER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/insider and use code INSIDER for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Somebody in the chat was... Somebody in the chat says Parker making more rookie mistakes than the OU offense. I know, man. I know. Everybody is just a little bit off right now. Got to get right. This weekend's got to be a get right game for me and for for the Sooners against West Virginia, Jesse. Now, Sooner Magic says sponsors are ruining good things. No, sponsors are not ruining good things. We're grateful for our sponsors, grateful for our partners that enable us to bring you good content and more content over the course of the week. So thanks to Prize Picks. Now, to the super chats we go. Been keeping an eye on these, and we have at least a couple. So first super chat comes from James Stimmick, who says, is Danny Okoye okay? Have y'all seen his Twitter? I have not seen Danny Okoye's Twitter. If anything is amiss with Danny Okoye, that is news to me. It does look like he posted a picture from St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa that said, pray for my health, y'all. So obviously unclear what's going on there, but prayers are with Danny Okoye, no question about it. We'll keep close tabs on that. Ill Midnight says, and he dropped $20, which we appreciate. 1, why does Jeff Lebby run so many bubble screens and jet sweeps? And 2, why don't we have a running game all season? 3, why does he get conservative and kill drives? UCF, SMU, Cincy, Texas have not been skeptical games on offense. So there's a lot to unpack there, Jesse. I thought it was interesting, though, after much was made of the whole jet sweep thing against Kansas, I don't think we saw a single jet sweep, to my recollection, against Oklahoma State.
We didn't, thankfully, because those jet sweeps against Kansas were pretty rough. And not only just that they didn't work, but the situations where they didn't work, particularly on 2-point conversions or late game situations or late down situations, were pretty rough. Here's the reality. The running back room has not worked out at all like I think any of us thought it would. Parker and I, anybody who's been around the program since the spring, I think the writing was on the wall that Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk were going to be the guys. Here's the reality. Javonte Barnes suffered an injury in the spring that has kept him not looking like himself. Gavin Sawchuk suffered an injury late in the summer that kept him not looking like himself. And Tawi Walker has been objectively the most productive running back this season, but even he has not been fully healthy all season. Couple all of that with the offensive line not always working perfectly. I think it's taken this long to figure out that guys like Caden Green deserve a lot of playing time in the offensive line. I think the disappointing part, if you're a fan, is that it's taken this long to figure things out. I think the Oklahoma State game was really the first time almost all season where things kind of looked like we thought they would. But again, it wasn't Javonte Barnes, it's Tawi Walker and Gavin Sawchuk. So I think the reality is that things looked a lot more clear than they were or than they ended up being once the season started. I think that threw a wrench in things. I think as far as the play calling, I do think there's been instances where Jeff Lebby has been a little cute, where I think OU every game except for maybe Texas has had a physical advantage, has had a talent advantage. The play calling has not always looked as such, or in terms of like not understanding that observation. And I think the reality is that the running game all season has not been consistent enough for Jeff Lebby to have faith in it. And then the other side of it is Angelo Anthony's been out the last 3 weeks, and Angelo Anthony played a really pivotal part in this offense. So I don't know if that's answering all the questions, Parker, but I think the reality is Jeff Lebby deserves some blame. Absolutely. But I think things looked a lot more clear going into the season than they ended up being, whether that's injuries or just general production. I think there's concerns with situational football. I think there's been concerns with some of the play calling, but also the offensive line hasn't been super consistent. The running game hasn't been super consistent. And I think Jeff Lebby's offenses historically want to lean on the running game. And when that hasn't always worked out this season, I think that's spooked Jeff Lebby a little bit. So I don't know if that answers all the questions from that super chat, but it's been a little bit more confusing and chaotic than I think any of us could have predicted going into week one.
We had another listener ask via the chat function, what's going on with Peyton Bowen? And Peyton Bowen has been dealing with some ankle soreness. It's something that's hampered him the last couple of weeks. And so that's why you haven't seen him on the field as much. I am of the opinion, Jesse, and this is just me. And look, at the end of the day, the OU coaches are far more qualified to make these calls than me. I wonder why, though, they've been content to play Peyton Bowen at who knows what 60, 70, 80%, 3 straight games now, rather than just shutting him down, letting him rest, getting him right for the stretch run. And maybe there's no considerable drop off in his level of play from full health to whatever he's at right now. But if that's the case, he's got to be on the field more than he has been.
What did I say during Quick Slants yesterday? I said it's clear that Tawi Walker isn't fully healthy, but if you're going to play him, if he's going to see snaps, it doesn't make sense to go halfway. Tawi Walker looked good when he was in. He's not fully healthy, but he looked good. But again, he really only saw time in the second half. I think that's a fair thing about Peyton Bowen. Like, I'm not saying that if Peyton Bowen's not 100% healthy, he can't ever see the field, but I agree with you. I think there's an argument to be made that if they're not fully healthy, then it doesn't make sense to play them like small amounts of snaps when really seeing the field at all could aggravate an injury or make things worse. So I agree with you. I think that's a concern, or if you want to call it a criticism. Peyton Bowen was a huge part of this defense for the first 6 weeks. I do think, look, I think we've seen that the depth behind Peyton Bowen and a lot of the depth in the secondary hasn't been great. But I do think, like, if you're going to feel good enough to play guys like Tawee Walker and Peyton Bowen some snaps, it doesn't make sense. It almost doesn't make sense to play them like halfway instead of either playing them not at all or all the way, if that makes sense.
No, I'm with you. I think if Tawee Walker's going to play, great, let him play. If he's not going to play, then hold him out. I thought it was weird that he didn't touch the field till the third quarter, and then first carry he gets, he's off to the end zone. Like, okay, well, that might have been nice. Might have been nice a little sooner. James said, LOL, Parker, you butchered my name. Sorry, James. Give me the correct pronunciation next time you drop a super chat, and I will make sure. I had to make an educated guess. Evidently, it was not a very good educated guess. Somebody in the chat asked, any word on R. Mason Thomas? Man, it feels like that's a guy we've hardly talked about. And Brent Venables has never really mentioned RMT in his injury updates. Obviously, he was dealing with an ankle issue earlier in the year, but he has played very sporadically.
So
like he's either not played or he has played very sporadically.
I have the snaps here, Parker. So R. Mason Thomas has played in 5 of 9 games this season.
Okay.
He played in 19 snaps against He played 19 snaps against UCF. He played 23 against Kansas. He did not play a single snap against Oklahoma State.
He played 23 against Kansas. Wow, I would not have guessed.
Played 23 against Kansas, this is according to Pro Football Focus. He played 10 against Kansas, but he missed the Arkansas State game. He missed the Tulsa game. He missed the Arkansas State game. He missed the Cincinnati game. And I asked Brent about R. Mason Thomas, I want to say 3 weeks ago, and Brent said that R. Mason Thomas was the best defensive end on the team. But he's been
at full health, that's true.
Yeah. He's been struggling with injuries really in both legs. That's actually what I thought was most interesting, is Brent said it's been in both legs. He's been dealing with injuries. That is, I wish he would have said something about him today, because the reality is he saw 23 snaps against Kansas, which was 2 off of a season high. Didn't play at all against Oklahoma State. Parker, you and I were incredibly high about R. Mason Thomas going into the year. When he's played, he's looked really good. He just hasn't stayed healthy. And considering Brent Venables didn't mention him on Saturday or on Tuesday, it's unclear if he's going to play on Saturday.
And again, that's one of those guys, especially with the knowledge that he's played 5 games. Like, okay, well, why? If he's banged up continually, why not just shelve him? Let him take a red shirt. You save a year of eligibility. That year's burned now. So I don't know, man. The coaches know more than I do, though. That's what I always try to remember. Let's talk a little bit of recruiting and transfer portal as well, because portal rumblings are starting to get around. Most specifically, as it pertains to OU, there was some noise being made about Oklahoma potentially making a run at Boise State wide receiver Eric McAllister, who just entered the transfer portal a few days ago. He was the Broncos' leading receiver to that point, a native of Texas. And the thought was kind of, okay, he's getting in the portal to go somewhere bigger and somewhere closer to home. Oklahoma made sense in a lot of folks' minds. Here's what I know. Here's what I can say about the Eric McAllister situation. OU took a look. They decided they didn't love what they saw. I would not expect the Sooners to be a player for Eric McAllister. And also, if you think culturally about what Brent Venables is trying to instill and accomplish at Oklahoma, a guy that quits on his team midseason to hit the portal, probably not the type of guy that's going to be a hand and glove fit in the Oklahoma locker room anyway. So don't really expect anything to come of that between Oklahoma and Eric McAllister, the talented Boise State wideouts. As far as recruiting, dropped a note over at OUinsider.com last night. Full details are over there, but The long and short of it is right now, I don't really expect Eddie Pierre-Louis, the 4-star offensive lineman out of the state of Florida, to make it into Oklahoma this weekend for his unofficial visit. Grant Bricks will be in town. That was never in doubt. That was never a question. He will be in attendance for this football game. That's Oklahoma's last chance to make a strong impression with the 4-star offensive guard out of the state of Iowa. And I do think Oklahoma is still in the driver's seat there. I expect as of now that they will end up getting his commitment. And I think there's a world in which that happens pretty quickly after this West Virginia game. But Eddie Pierre-Louis, it's looking increasingly unlikely that he ends up in the Crimson and Cream. And it's been a weird recruitment, been a weird one to follow, been a weird one to cover. Long and short of it right now is UCF is where the safe money lies, and it wouldn't totally shock me if he pulled a fast one on everybody and committed to Oregon. That's just the kind of recruitment this has been. So that brings you up to speed on the remaining 2024 targets. I mean, there are really only 2 of them. Kobe Black, technically, if he shows up this weekend, great. I have no expectations as far as that kid is concerned. Never really have. But more or less, your board right now, as far as uncommitted guys, consists of Eddie Pierre-Louis, Grant Bricks. Then you see who you can flip down the road. Not a whole lot to break down right now from a recruiting perspective. Let's go to the chat and see what you folks are saying. HTX Fan 80 says, can y'all explain the issues Andrew Rame has at snapping the ball? Because Rame, you're killing us. And bad snaps, Jesse, directly responsible for 2 Oklahoma turnovers this past Saturday.
This is the big thing, and maybe the weird thing about what came out of the Monday player availabilities, Parker, is because Andrew Rame was asked about this directly, and he said, quote, I will take blame for one of them. That's what Andrew Rame said. I'll take blame for one of them. And then he later said, when asked specifically about the one in the first quarter after the 50-yard bomb to Nick Anderson, the next play was the snap to Javonte Barnes, that when you watch the replay, it looks like clearly it was a snap to Javonte Barnes. Andrew Rame basically said he didn't know what to say, and I think he said almost word for word, he's been told by different people different things. That makes this confusing. But what we do know is that Andrew Rame said he would take blame for one of the 2 snaps, and implicitly the snap he's taking blame for is the one to Dylan Gabriel in the 4th quarter after Oklahoma State went up 24-21. As far as an answer to that or why that's been a problem, I don't really know. Andrew Rame said that maybe the crowd got to him on that one snap. As far as what happened on the other one, to me, when you watch the replay, it's clear that Andrew Rame just snapped the ball to Javonte Barnes. If you ask Andrew Rame, there was confusion about what the play was or what was supposed to happen. But Parker, it's genuinely one of the weirder things I've ever experienced, that the center who snapped the ball won't say or can't say exactly what happened on what ended up being a pivotal play. Oklahoma had momentum deep in Oklahoma State territory, and the center can't or won't say what happened. It's one of the weirder things I've ever seen.
It seemed like the type of deal, Jesse, where maybe he was given a directive from somebody higher up. Hey, don't elaborate too much on this for one reason or another. I can't put my finger on why that would be, but we've dealt with these players enough in the past to know when they've been instructed and or coached not to talk about something. And it definitely felt in that moment like Andrew Rame had an understanding that he wasn't supposed to say more than a certain amount as it pertained to that situation. Again, not sure why that would be. I can't make heads or tails of it, but it was weird and it was awkward for a second. Back to the chat. Okie Trade says it's like we only call 3-yard routes and 40-yard routes. Where are the 10 to 15-yard routes? Okay, here's an interesting nugget, Jesse, and something that I would love your thoughts. I might have brought this up in the post-game podcast. It was so late that I don't really remember whether I did or not. But I was talking to a source over the weekend who told me, look, the reason why OU doesn't go over the middle of the field all that much is because it's a lot more difficult for Dillon Gabriel to attack the middle of the field than other quarterbacks because of his height. And, having a short quarterback, Jesse, you have some natural limitations and natural constraints on what you can do with a guy like that. And Dillon Gabriel has always done a tremendous job of playing within himself, playing within those constraints. But constraints are constraints nonetheless. And I don't know if that is the only explanation for it, but it is undeniably true that Oklahoma just has not really attacked the middle of the field very often or very regularly in 2023.
So let me give you the stats here per Pro Football Focus. And this lays out not how long passing plays ended up resulting in, but the depth of target. So deep means 20 yards or more. That means the ball sailed 20 yards or more to a receiver downfield. Medium means 10 to 19 yards. So that's intermediate, which I think is what the super chat is talking about. Short is 0 to 9 yards. And then you have behind the line of scrimmage. So according to Pro Football Focus, OU has attempted 39 passes beyond 20 yards. They've attempted 59 passes in the medium 10 to 19 yard range of the field. They've attempted 108 between 0 to 9 yards and 69 behind the line of scrimmage. So that means of the 4 of those, behind the line of scrimmage is the second most common depth of target this season.
So to boil it down there, most of Oklahoma's passes are of the short variety, and they throw behind the line of scrimmage more than they throw intermediate.
Or deep. Both.
Or deep.
Or both.
Gosh, man. It's weird because you think about where Oklahoma has had the most success, Jesse. Like, Oklahoma's had the most success in the passing game on the intermediate and deep. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And I actually think one of the criticisms about the UCF and Kansas games is that OU didn't throw the ball deep enough. And then against Oklahoma State, I actually thought Dillon Gabriel made some plays down the field that there were a few times that the balls just weren't caught. There was one Nick Anderson. Yeah, there was a Nick Anderson one that he certainly should have caught and a Jalil Farouk one that he definitely should have caught. But yeah, I think, Parker, to your point about intermediate passing and why that hasn't happened, I think it's a couple of things. I think, one, it's not a strength of Dillon Gabriel. Career, like you look at the numbers career-wise, not only intermediate passing, but the middle of the field has not been a strength of his. And I do think it's accurate that his height compared to other quarterbacks plays a factor in that. I also think it's Jeff Lebby's play calling. I think he schemes things and structures things that it's almost like a little bit or all of it. It's almost like it's either barely down the field or not at all or way down the field. I think it's both. I do. I think there's something about getting cute behind the line of scrimmage or barely farther than the line of scrimmage or down the field. I honestly think it's both. I do.
Here's an interesting question. You think the reason we haven't seen Brandon Thompson more, and a lot of folks have been clamoring for more Brandon Thompson, but you think the reason we haven't seen more of him is because drops are a legit struggle? Because we have seen him catch 3 passes this season. We have also seen him drop 2 passes, including one that would have moved the chains Saturday and resulted in a 4th down for Oklahoma.
I think that's part of it. I do. I think that's part of it. But also, and Parker, I wrote this at OU Insider when we were trying to think about, what does this offense do with that Angelo Anthony? This isn't just at OU. This is historically with Jeff Lebby offenses. His offenses primarily rely on a top 3. And that's why through the first 6 weeks, Drake Stoops, Jalil Farouk, and Angelo Anthony saw way more snaps than anybody else. Like, Nick Anderson was 4th in snaps the first 6 weeks, and he saw barely half the snaps of Angelo Anthony, who had saw the 3rd most snaps. And that's why the last 3 weeks, Nick Anderson has taken that Angelo Anthony role, and he's seen way more snaps than anybody else. That's why Jaden Gibson saw 1 snap against Oklahoma State. 1. 6'4", athletic, has made contested catches, saw 1 snap against Oklahoma State. So I do think it's a little bit of that drop problem. And I do think, Parker, the reality is we've heard about the depth of this wide receiver room all year, but I think it's pretty clear that Jeff Lebby wants to primarily utilize 3 top receivers. And when Angelo Anthony got hurt, Nick Anderson slid in that role because he had seen the 4th most snaps before that. And I just don't think this offense has a ton of room for guys that aren't in that top 3. I honestly think that's probably most of it.
Super chat from Ill Midnight, his second one of the day. Thank you, sir. He says, are we recruiting a kicker in 2024? We need to. Yes, folks. And trust me, if you haven't yet been introduced to a fellow by the name of Liam Evans, you will be before long, especially if you stick around on OUinsider.com, because never imagined there would be as ballyhooed of a commit on special teams than Liam Evans is right now for Oklahoma. A lot of that has to do with Zach Schmidt's struggles, but Liam Evans is right up the road in Moore, America. I know him and his family very well. His dad and my dad go back a long way, interestingly enough. So OU was always kind of the dream for Liam. He's always been an excellent kicker. Joined OU's class, I believe committed back in August, if I'm not mistaken, as a preferred walk-on. And that is somebody that will be capable of starting right off the bat if he needs to when he gets to campus. He has not missed a field goal this year as a senior in high school, and he has had multiple attempts of beyond 50 yards. We haven't seen Zach Schmidt hit from beyond 50 yards this year and maybe in his career, Jesse. So but this brings up another conversation, though, that is worth having. How bad are all the other kickers?
The fact that we haven't seen anybody else, we saw a couple of them in the spring game, and I thought it was interesting that Brent Venables mentioned that Zach Schmidt is 45 of 45 on PATs on the year, which I guess is a good thing.
Okay. If you miss a PAT, like if he were to miss a PAT, that would be the point at which I'd say, okay, take his shoulder pads away.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear. Look, I don't think Zach Schmidt is a horrible kicker. I just don't think he's a good kicker. And it was also interesting to say that when Brent Venables said we shouldn't have kicked the 51-yarder against Oklahoma State. And it's like, okay, yeah, you probably shouldn't have. The offense should have done more. But if you knew that, why'd you kick it? Why did you go to, if you knew that before it happened, that kick was 5 yards short. If you knew that was not a good idea, why did you go to kick it?
That doesn't talking about the kick this past weekend against Oklahoma State?
Yeah.
Oh no, he didn't miss that one short. He hit it long enough. It was wide right.
Wait, I'm thinking of
you're thinking of the kick in the Texas game.
I'm thinking of the kick in the Texas game.
Yeah, I don't know what happened on that.
Yeah, let me back up. Sorry. The Oklahoma State kick, it was long enough. He just missed it. But when Brent Venables said on Tuesday, we should have been kicking a 51-yarder, and it's like, okay, then why did you make the decision to kick the 51-yarder? So I think Zach Schmidt is okay. He's just not great.
Yeah, well, and that's
it's not great.
It's a liability, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to have a kicker that you can rely on, and Oklahoma can't rely on Zach Schmidt right now. 3 more points would have been nice to have on Saturday. And
we've seen the last 3 weeks this offense make decisions because they're scared of having Zach Schmidt come on the field. That's the reality.
And to your point as to why Brent Venables kicked it, I can't remember how long it was to convert, but that was a 4th and long. It was one of those scenarios where either you kick the field goal or you make a decision to try and go for it that in all likelihood you're not going to convert. And then everybody that doesn't know your kicker situation is scratching their heads going, why on earth would they even have attempted that? So again, yes, 3 straight weeks where not having a reliable kicker has very tangibly come into play and affected the decision-making process for Oklahoma. And you just can't have that. You got to have a guy that you can count on. And I wonder at what point we will see this program use a scholarship on a specialist, because there currently is not a scholarship specialist. And I believe the last one to occupy a scholarship, the most recent one, was Michael Turk. Gabe Burkich was on scholarship as well when he was here kicking. Those are the last two kicker and punters specialists, respectively, to have earned scholarships. And Casey Kelleher, the longtime long snapper, he was on scholarship at a certain point as well. But right now, the Sooners do not have a scholarship specialist on the roster, and they've certainly played as if they do not have a scholarship specialist on the roster. Now, I will say, to his credit, Luke Elzinga has been fantastic.
He's been great.
He booted 156 yards in the air on Saturday. And again, it's all the more head scratching why Josh Plaster punted for the first 6 games of the season when you had Luke Elzinga sitting there on the bench. All MAC conference the last 2 years. It's like, what? How did that happen? How was that allowed to continue for 6 games, half a football season? Back to the chat here. We got a super chat from Russell, our man Russell Jenkins, who says, plug the gate, food, drinks, and group therapy. Yes, folks, listen. If you plan on being in Norman at Owen Field on Saturday for the matchup between Oklahoma and West Virginia, do yourself a favor and stop by the OU Insider Tailgate, which is going to be set up right across from the stadium on Lindsay Street. I mean, you can literally, if you were to bisect the stadium, if you were to cut the stadium in half lengthwise, the line that you would cut would also cut through the OU Insider Tailgate tent. That is how centrally located it is on Lindsay Street. So if you're in the mood for free food, you want to hang with us, get some intel that maybe you wouldn't get on the boards or on the live stream, come on by the tailgate. We're going to be there all day. Russ is the man. He gets things going every single Saturday that Oklahoma has a home game, and he is there early. I think he said on the board post over at ouinsider.com that there's going to be stuff coming off the grill at 11 a.m. So we're talking about a 6 p.m. kick, folks. 7 hours of tailgating ahead. 7 full hours. So drop by anytime. We'd be happy to chat with you, meet you, shake your hand, give you some free OU Insider swag and some food, some Olipop as well. There will be Olipop involved. So again, the OU Insider Tailgate takes place this Saturday. Also should be a good opportunity to meet some recruits and their families, because got to figure the Boganowskis are going to be stopping by. They're going to be in town, and they're regulars. I don't know if there has been a more liked post on OU Insider this year than Mike Boganowski Sr.'s introductory post on the message board a few days back. That was fun. Everybody loved it. And he's a great character. We love having him. He's a good cook as well. We got to get him on the grill. Let's see what else we have in the chat. Ryan Orr asks, we getting anyone to flip? Well, look, it's not something I would count on at this time. I will say, based on some of the rumblings I have heard from connections down in Texas, it does not appear that Jimbo Fisher is going to survive the season as Texas A&M's head football coach. And if that is the case, naturally that's going to have ramifications in the recruiting sphere. And Oklahoma did heavily pursue and finished as the runner-up for 2 very highly regarded top 100 national prospects that ended up committing to Texas A&M in defensive lineman Dominic McKinley and wide receiver Terry Bussey. So if Jimbo Fisher is shown the door at Texas A&M, and again, that's kind of my expectation right now, then you can expect that the Sooners are going to ramp up their pursuit of those 2 individuals in particular. Now, Whether or not they decommit, I can't say. That's impossible to predict, because you also got to take into account how much of the staff is shown the door with Jimbo, how much is retained, who the next guy is, how long the recruiting staff is able to stem the tide and prevent some of those guys from decommitting before the new staff gets in place. There's a lot of variables at play there, but just know that if Jimbo Fisher is not retained as A&M's head coach, things could get interesting as far as OU is concerned with Bussey and with Dominic McKinley, because both of those guys and their families had a lot of love for Oklahoma. Not enough to prevent them from committing to Texas A&M, but if circumstances change, things could be reevaluated within both of their camps. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. Brian Pearson says A&M still has NIL money. Yes, they do. They've got a lot of it, but they're going to have to set aside a pretty big chunk of change to pay Jimbo Fisher's buyout at this rate. Christy H says, I kind of want A&M to keep Jimbo. Well, for selfish reasons, if you're an OU fan, yes, I'm sure you would. Twisted Monkey says, I'd give my kidney for Terry Bussey and Dominic McKinley. Yeah, those are two pretty good football players. Guys that would be welcome additions. Cherries on top, if you will, for Oklahoma's 2024 class. We got predictions rolling in. Boomer 129 says 28-24 OU this weekend. Wayfaring Farmer says West Virginia 35, Oklahoma 28. So we got at least one viewer, Jesse, that's taken the Mountaineers to pull the upset. West Virginia has never beaten Oklahoma in Norman. They had never beaten Oklahoma in Big 12 play, period, until last year up in Morgantown, which was a miserable experience.
Yeah.
Miserable game to cover.
Yes.
What do you think? What do you think the outcome is? I guess we haven't really turned the page to talking about this game yet, but what do you imagine transpires Saturday?
So here's the thing. West Virginia wants to run the ball. They've been really good at it this year. OU has faced 3 straight opponents who are good at running the ball. I think to mixed results. They were good against UCF, bad against Kansas, decent against Oklahoma State. They held Ollie Gordon to 4.2 yards per carry. They kind of sold out to stop Ollie Gordon, and that kind of left some room for Alan Bowman to have some success, at least from the first half. So I think, to me, I'm going into this weekend looking at, can West Virginia establish the run? If they can, that's not great for Oklahoma's chances. But if Oklahoma can stop the run and keep Garrett Green, who's not only a mobile quarterback, but killed Oklahoma last year in Morgantown, I think the players from who were on the team this year, who were on the team last year, have nightmares of Garrett Green. If Oklahoma can keep that all contained, I think that bodes well for OU. Defensively, I think West Virginia has been decent at stopping the run and the pass. So I think OU is going to try to look to establish the run again on Saturday, kind of like they did against Oklahoma State. OU should win this game. It's the same thing that we said against Oklahoma State and Kansas. OU has the talent advantage. OU should win this game. But if you're asking me if there are paths to victory for West Virginia, yes, there is. So I like Oklahoma to win in a close game, but if Oklahoma has played the way, or if Oklahoma plays the way it has the last 3 weeks, West Virginia will beat them. OU can't turn the ball over, can't have awful turnovers, and can't let West Virginia's rushing attack run all over them. So that's my general analysis.
Last 2 matchups between these teams have been kind of ugly. Oklahoma won 16-13 in Norman back in 2021. Obviously, the Mountaineers returned the favor, winning 23-20 last year up in Morgantown. 2 real, knockdown, drag it out type of football games. Not a lot of tremendous offense from either program on both of those occasions. I think Austin Stogner's most recent touchdown catch as an Oklahoma Sooner came in that West Virginia game 2 years ago, but he did catch one in his final game as a Sooner before transferring to South Carolina, that Bedlam game against Oklahoma State. We got an Austin Stogner question from Terry Tunnel, who wants to know, Parker, do you agree with a lot of the other people that Stog is washed up? And man, I hate saying it because he's such a good dude. He bleeds crimson in the truest sense. Like, he is as diehard of an Oklahoma Sooner as you will find, and he truly relishes the opportunity to be back in this uniform for one final season. But Jesse, the harsh reality is, like, he's just not adding much of value right now to the offense.
You're right. I think when we were going into the season and we were thinking about who the primary targets were going to be, we were looking at Braden Willis last year, who was a huge part of this offense. It honestly looked like Austin Stogner would kind of fill in pretty naturally for that, like in that Braden Willis role. Austin Stogner has not done that. I mean, he's caught 10 passes on the season for 91 yards. He hasn't been really effective in the receiving game. I think he's had good moments as a blocker and bad moments as a blocker. I do think overall, you're right, Parker. Look, Austin Stogner's a good dude. I think he provides a culture benefit. He provides an off the field benefit. But I do think if you had said, like, if you had told either of us that through 9 games that Austin Stogner would only have 10 receptions, I think both of us would think that was a disappointment. And considering that, I think Braden Willis almost had 40 receptions last year. I'm not saying they're both the same player. I'm not saying you have to compare them the same way, but considering that Stogner is on pace basically to finish with less than 15 receptions for the year, I do think that that's disappointing. And if he's not catching passes, it is almost like, why is he on the field if he's not getting targeted or catching a bunch of passes?
Yeah, and it's just like, again, it's tough because that is, as a journalist, you find yourself rooting for people more so than teams. And Austin Stogner is one of those guys you root for. And it's tough to watch him come back and be such a minor piece in this Oklahoma passing attack, borderline non-existent piece. I mean, you said, Jesse, 10 receptions for 91 yards all year. The longest of those covered 19 yards. The Sooners have one catch of over 20 yards from a tight end this year, and that was Cade McIntyre in garbage time against Arkansas State. So the tight end position as a whole just has not been a threat in any capacity for Oklahoma. And that is the one area I think where you just have seen a stark regression from 2022 to 2023, because Oklahoma had excellent tight end play a year ago, and now they have absent tight end play. And yeah, I think Austin Stogner probably goes in that same category as a guy like Justin Broyles, right? Where you can't say a bad thing about him as a person. You just can't. But you definitely look back on his OU career and wonder, gosh, what the heck happened? Especially with this being his final year, his swan song, the year he came back for. He's got to be one of the first guys in the history of the transfer portal to transfer elsewhere, play a full season with another team, and then end up back at the school he started with. It's unique. Brian Pearson says Caden Helms' injury hurting the tight end room. Yeah, that's a guy you'd love to have healthy right now. You would love to have Caden Helms healthy, but that's not reality. Terry Triton says, put some pads on Parker, let him block. Trust me, you don't want that. You don't want that. I don't got the bulk to play tight end. I'm like 185. So that's not going to cut it. Mysterious Oklahoma says, seems like Lebby is playing favorites. What do you think, Jesse? And this is probably the last conversation we'll have as we hit some final questions before we wrap up. But I made the comment that I guess I see where that's coming from, but I also feel like maybe there are too many guys playing offensively right now for Oklahoma, because when you're giving snaps to guys like Dalen Smothers and JJ Hester in crucial situations, it leaves me scratching my head. I don't know if it leaves everybody scratching their head, but I'm wondering, okay, why? What's the rationale behind that?
I mean, I guess I can kind of see that, but I mean, the reality is, you look at the receiver room. And again, I mentioned this earlier. It was Jalil Farouk, Drake Stoops, and Angelo Anthony seeing the bulk of the snaps. Since Angelo Anthony got hurt, Nick Anderson has filled that role. But Drake Stoops, which shout out to Drake Stoops. I'm going to have a feature on him at OU Insider later this week. He has 52 receptions on the year. I think you could make an argument that there hasn't been enough to Jalil Farouk or Nick Anderson. I don't know. I mean, I think the offensive line rotation was an interesting thing for a lot of the year, but on Saturday, Parker, it was the same 5 guys that played every snap: Raim, Guyton, Matower, Green, and who am I leaving out?
Walter Rouse.
Sorry. And Walter Rouse. But then there are other crazy things. You're right, Parker. To play Dalen Smothers when he hadn't played since non-conference play against Oklahoma State, to throw Javante Barnes out there for 2 snaps against Oklahoma State, to throw him out there for the fourth quarter against Kansas when he hadn't played for 5 weeks. I mean, yeah, there has been some confusing things, but I don't know, Parker. I think if anything, you can make an argument that the personnel decisions have been confusing, but they haven't played enough of their playmakers enough. I mean, Jaden Gibson seeing 1 snap against OSU is pretty confusing. For Brennan Thompson to not see consistent snaps all year is pretty confusing. I guess you can look at that as playing favorites, but to me, I think it's more about mismanagement of the position group rooms and less about favorites. But I don't know. I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I don't know.
The throw to Brennan Thompson downfield on Saturday that ultimately got picked off. Watching that unfold in real time, I was like, man, that's exactly what you're afraid of, having somebody like Brennan Thompson on the field, because as fast as he is, as electric as he is, at a certain point, there's going to be a tendency, or I shouldn't say a tendency. There's going to be a desire to want to force him the ball.
Yeah.
Because you're hunting for the big play. You see a big play dude on the field. You see him running downfield, and you're just willing to lay it all out and take a shot. And if Dylan Gabriel hits Brennan Thompson in stride there, maybe there's something, but it would have had to have been a perfect throw. He only had about half a step on the Oklahoma State defender. The ball was kind of underthrown, and it ends up getting picked off. And you got the safety shading over. He's in double coverage by the time the ball is midway through the air. And so it is the risk you run, having a guy like Brennan Thompson out there on the field, because your quarterback naturally, if he's approaching the game with an aggressive mindset and he wants to make plays for your football team, then he sees a dude like that on the field, he's going to be tempted to take a shot if it's even close to there. And ultimately, Saturday, it ended up being a turnover for Oklahoma. All right, that's going to wrap it up here on this installment of OU Insider Live. Thank you all for running with us here on a Wednesday evening. If you're not a member over at OUinsider.com, sign up now. Great time to join. National Signing Day is a month and a half away. We're going to have recruiting coverage, 2025 class heating up. I'll be in Wagner, Oklahoma on Friday for another decision that should go Oklahoma's way from a top 2025 prospect. So we got recruiting, we got football coverage, we got basketball coverage. If you're into basketball recruiting, we got that covered too. Our man Brody Lusk has been big with some hoops recruiting notes as well. So no better place to be for inside information on the Sooners than OUinsider.com. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to this channel. And we'll see you all next Wednesday. Take it easy, everybody.